Just a quick blurb, Friends of Pine Hawk puts on presentations during the month of October in particular of different speakers of Native American culture and archaeology. We also have a book discussion group runs monthly. We seem to be out brochures, but I have one here that you can look at. You can subscribe and get on an email list. Our speaker this evening is Dan Badillion, who is a very experienced amateur historian from Littleton, has studied the area in this general location for stone structures and also the Native American culture. I guess without going into a whole lot more introduction, you've added quite a bit to the Littleton Historical book for the 300th anniversary. You have a book in process, which eventually will come out. You've also published some other books about different areas in Massachusetts, about New England. So, very talented, very experienced speaker. So, Dan, why don't you take it from here? We have a lot to cover, so I've been asked to be brief. So here we are, so we have some time for questions.
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't want to be kicked out at 9 o'clock tonight without you knowing whether the butler did it or where. So, anyhow, thank you all for being here tonight. It's great to see you, and I've been looking forward to this for some time. Tonight's talk is going to be about Neshoba and as a Vision Quest Center. So we're going to start out with a little history about the Neshoba praying Indian village. Then we're going to look at some of the features of the village that suggest Vision Quest. Then we're going to compare it to another known Vision Quest site. And then we're going to bring it all together. And I think at the end of the evening you'll agree with me that there's very good reason to believe that Neshoba is a native Vision Quest site. So I'm ready to begin. If we can bring the lights down, please. Well, it is Littleton and Neshoba history, 1654 to 1720. Just haven't quite gotten there yet, you know. Okay, okay, let's begin. First slide, please. Okay, history and legend. Neshoba praying Indian village. The Littleton area was originally a praying Indian village. Back in 1646, Reverend John Eliot, known as the Apostle to the Indians, began an effort to organize the Massachusetts Indians into Christian villages. With the backing of Cromwell's England and 12,000 pounds sterling, he began a long-term mission to the Massachusetts and translated the Bible into Algonquin in 1663. His efforts were not only to convert the Indians to Christianity, but to organize them into English towns and lifestyles. Part of the conversion process was to live in English-deeded Indian towns, live in English-style houses, wear English clothes, and worship Puritan-style in meeting houses. Eliot seemed sincere in his efforts. It was essentially a marriage of opportunity for the English and one of necessity for many of the Indians. And what I mean about that is Eliot was proselytizing Christianity to the Indians, and we may look at that a bit askance from this day and age, but he was sincere in his time at least. But the English as a whole, the English governance over here, thought this was a really good way to have the Indians where they could see them, because Indians on these plantations you kind of keep an eye on as opposed to Indians in the wild. And Indians in the wild made the English a little nervous. So they liked the idea of these plantations. And for the Indians, there were two different takes on it. Indians from strong tribes hated it, would not do it, and laughed at Eliot in his face when you bring it up. Indians from weak tribes say that had been decimated by the war with the Tarentines and later the plagues, they couldn't defend themselves from the Mohawks. So for them, this was a way that they could come under English protection from the Mohawk raids, which were a yearly thing, and that actually worked for them. But as you can see, the English were going into it because they wanted to see the Indians, and the Indians were going into it because it was protection. But neither of them were going into it for Christianity. It's just a little odd thing I've noticed there. Okay, next slide.
Question. So praying Indian village means they were praying as Christians. Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, that's the term from
I'm trying to define what you mean.
Right, I'm sorry about that. That's the term used at the time, that Indians in these villages were termed the praying Indians as opposed to the
Wild
others.
savages.
Okay, this is the Biblum God. This is the 1663 Bible in Algonquin, which John Eliot translated. This is the very first book published in the New World. And I believe the very first song published over here was about some poor fellow who got bit by a rattlesnake and died. Okay, we had rattlesnakes out here in that time period. Between 1651 and 1658, Eliot and Daniel Gookin, commissioner to the Indians, organized 7 praying Indian villages in Massachusetts Bay Colony, and Neshoba Plantation was the 6th. All told, there were at least 14 such villages in Massachusetts with between 45 and 60 inhabitants each. Neshoba was a small village. They were down the 45 range. An interesting twist, Eliot allowed the Indians to choose the sites of their new villages. The local conquered Indians, led by an early convert, their Sachem Tehadawon, requested the Neshoba lands close by. And Neshoba is probably the closest that we'll ever come to knowing exactly how Neshoba was pronounced back then. With such latitude to location, it would not be unexpected for the Indians to choose places that were special or important to them. It is also known from Eliot that Neshoba was Tehadawon's main residence, again marking these lands as special. The Indian plantation of Neshoba was formally granted by General Court in 1654 and was laid out in a lozenge shape carved from a gore of unsettled lands situated between Groton, Chelmsford, Concord, and Lancaster. On paper, it was a 16-mile square of land with sides 4 miles in length. This area encompassed most of current-day Littleton and a portion of Boxborough, which was formerly Littleton. Okay, and here's a good map. The blue here is Littleton today. I'm sure you recognize the shape. And the red is the old Neshoba Indian plantation. And this whole section here, this used to be Littleton, and it's now part of Boxborough. And while on paper it was 4 by 4 by 4 by 4, in reality on the ground it was 3 1/4 by 5 by 3 7/8 miles by 4 5/8 miles. So it wasn't really the same thing, and this became an issue when the plantation was sold off in four sales to the English. They thought they were buying something within a 4 square section. It turned out to be, just 3 1/4 here. So that means towards the end of it, people weren't quite getting what they wanted, and that was an issue. Okay, next one. Okay, here's a close-up, Magog Pond, Fort Pond. Here we are in Acton here. And the question has arisen from time to time, was Neshoba Plantation ever part of Acton? And it is now, because you can see, well, you may not know this, but the blue line is the Littleton-Acton line, and that line has moved. It used to be here, butting up against the plantation, and now it's here. So, at least today, the Neshoba Plantation is a bit in Littleton, and this is the most significant area of the plantation. The last part held little in Indian lands, so the most significant part actually is in Acton today. Okay. Neshoba Plantation thrived until King Philip's Indian War in 1675-1676, when the praying Indians were removed to Concord, and then to Deer Island in Boston Harbor, then to Long Island, then to Cambridge, and back to Concord again. The whole Deer Island era is something I'd like to talk about at length, but time does not permit me tonight, so I'm just going to mention it in passing. Although the Neshoba Indians survived the islands better than most, for the most part they settled instead at the praying Indian village of Natick after the war. There was a lot of back and forth between Natick and Neshoba, and Natick was a more robust village, better able to protect itself against the Mohawks. So after King Philip's War, they mostly migrated down to Natick. There was only a small seasonal presence in Neshoba after this, and the plantation was sold to the English in 4 transactions between 1682 and 1701. It was incorporated as the English township of Neshoba in 1714 and renamed Littleton in 1715. As part of the Act of Incorporation in 1714, The general court ordered that a small portion of the town be set aside for any remaining descendants of the Neshoba praying Indians. This set-aside became known as the Indian New Town, a 500 square tract of rocky hill between and including portions of Magog Pond and Fort Pond. And in the previous picture, I kind of marked out a little square. We'll get back to that square later. But that is the Indian New Town, and that does extend a bit into Acton today. Now, something interesting over here, and I only noticed this the other day when I was looking at it, preparing for this talk. This is the town of Littleton Seal. You have John Eliot here preaching apparently, and you have an Indian on the other side. What I noticed is that John Eliot is in a Masonic pose. I don't know if there's any Masons here tonight, but this pose that both him and I are doing is a Masonic pose. I don't know if this is just coincidence or there was something else to that, but that is about as Masonic a stance as you can get. Okay, next please. Okay, Eliot didn't preach to the Indians in churches. He instead would get up on a big boulder, and some of these Eliot pulpits, as they're called, are still around. This one was over in Boxborough, where the SciTech building is now. It has been since destroyed. This one is still around. This is in Roxbury, and Eliot would stand up there and preach to the natives. He did not get a very good reception in Roxbury. That was one of the places where the Indians were strong, and they were not interested in his ideas. Okay, what does Neshoba mean? Neshoba is a word of several meanings. In general, Neshoba is considered to mean between the waters, these being Magog Pond and Fort Pond, and less significantly, Long Lake. In reference to Neshoba Hill, this has been identified as a Native American name that means hill that shakes. Indeed, it is from Neshoba Hill that the early English settlers said the boomings and rumblings emanated. Sachem Tadwan certainly did choose a place of special and unusual qualities, intentional or not. Okay, and here's a really nice picture of Lake Magog. This is taken up from Magog Hill Road. I took this about 15 years ago. This is all since grown up, and you really don't get the, with a lot of scrub, you just don't get that view anymore. But it's just such a beautiful lake, Magog. Okay. And here's Fort Pond, the other water of which Neshoba is between. And what we're looking at here is Speens Point. That's a name that comes up an awful lot when we talk about Neshoba Indians. And when I mentioned that Neshoba and Natick are connected, there is I think a Speen Street down in Natick, once again after John Speen, I think it's John Speen, the Indian. There's also Speens Field, Speens Hill, etc. Okay, now we're going to start getting into it. Daniel Gookin wrote in his 1674 historical collections of the Indians that near unto this town Neshoba is a pond, wherein at some seasons there is a strange rumbling noise. As the Indians affirm, the reason thereof is not yet known. Some have considered the hill adjacent as hollow, wherein the wind being pent is the cause of this rumbling. Reverend Foster in 1815 said this: the above-mentioned pond must be Magog. It lies on the eastern extremity of this town. The adjacent hill is not specifically identified by Gookin, but John Mitchell, in Trespassing, indicates that is a low hill to the northwest of Magog Pond and paints this picture. John Mitchell: the hill was hollow, and the four winds were pent up inside. Periodically they would attempt to escape, and at these times terrible roarings and growls and rumblings would issue forth from within the hill. The very earth would shudder. Massive rocks would shift from their beds. Trees would sway and creep. And were it not for the intercession of the shaman, the earth might have cracked open and revealed the dark, boiling innards. I just love John Mitchell's writings. Just so good. Okay, eyewitnesses of the rumblings in earlier centuries clearly identified the spot as Neshoba Hill. John Barber in 1841 said, the report of strange noises heard occasionally in this pond was not without foundation. But the noise was not within the water, as they, the Indians, imagined, but from a hill lying to the northwest direction and about half a mile distant from the pond, partially in Littleton and partially in Westford, known by the name of Neshoba Hill. Okay, earth noises. So we have these, the hill making noise. Now we're going to just talk about a different kind of a noise. Other odd earth noises heard in Neshoba at the time were loud humming sounds that emanated from beneath the praying Indian village. This humming was recorded by Eliot, who knew the village well and lived there off and on while preaching. He said, out of the cavities under great rocks, that pond in that place, that pond being Magog, there was a great while after often heard a humming noise. A town's clerk report in Littleton from 1896 references the above as follows. He, Eliot, came to this place to visit his wards, and in his writings are found allusions to it, among others to the noises in Neshoba Hill. Those noises, those strange hummings, still continue. Back in the early 1980s, there was a humming sound that was heard in the ground in Littleton. It sounded like it was coming from the north and moving gradually to the southwards, and it was most audible near the Congregational Church on King Street. One of my good friends, Andy Bowers, talks about this often. Okay, humming sounds from the earth are not without precedent. Many of you may have heard of the Tahoe's hum, which is the most well-known, but if you Google humming sounds from the earth, you're going to get a bunch of hits from all around the world, just these odd humming sounds that radiate up that no one seems to know what they are. Okay. Water monsters. In Indian belief, related by John Mitchell in Trespassing, is that Magog Pond was supposedly home to a water monster in the time of the Neshoba praying Indian village. According to Mitchell, Apsinic was a water beast that lived deep in the pond. It had horns and a gnashing beak and would reach up out of the waters of Magog at certain times and draw the entrails of passing villagers down into its depths. He's got away with words. Its tentacled arms would feel along the shores for victims. I'm telling you right now, if the town of Concord could come up with some kind of pact with Apsinic, it would keep all his fishermen and swimmers out of the pond. While I'm not familiar with any native legends of this description of water monster, there is considerable lore among Algonquin-speaking people about something called a horned water serpent or water panther. These horned water serpents or panthers were dangerous man-eating creatures known for lurking in lakes and rivers and attacking unwary travelers. The Algonquin-speaking peoples considered the underwater panther the most powerful denizen of the underworld. It had the head and paws of a giant mountain lion, but with bison-like horns. Its body was snake-like and covered in scales, and it had sharp spikes running along its back and serpentine tail. These water panthers were said to live in the deepest parts of lakes and rivers, where they can cause storms and roar and hiss in the sounds of storms or rushing rapids. Okay, this is a sketch of something called a piazza, and it was drawn by the natives on the riverbank of some cliffs of the Mississippi River, and it was sketched out in 1668 by Jean-Baptiste Bramwellen. Not sure I said that right. But anyhow, here you go. You see the little humps along the back, you see the scales, you see the long serpentine tail. Here you've got the claws, the mountain lion claws, you've got the bison horns. It's in the water. I'm not sure the face looks like a mountain lion, but this is a very good representation of that water panther. I think it's just great that we were able to have this picture of it, that he took the time to sketch it out. The Abenaki of Maine called these serpentine water creatures the Petaskaw, meaning great snake. South of New England, the Cherokee name for the horned serpent is the Actena. Further afield, yet of particular interest, the Hopi and Zuni horned water serpent had the power to destroy villages by earthquake, flood, and landslide. The roaring noises it was said to make and its link to earthquakes are of particular interest. And we're going to be talking a lot about earthquakes tonight, so wherever it comes up, you want to kind of like make a mental note of that. And here it's coming up in context of the water panther. Okay, the Sarod Doublet Forest. Some people feel that Neshoba is haunted, specifically the area known as the Sarod Doublet Forest on the rocky hill squeezed between Neshoba Pond and Fort Pond. This is the 500-acre area that was set aside in 1714 for the remaining Indians after they sold off the village. And that's that little square that I pointed to a few slides back, of which we'll talk more about. It is considered to be central to the old village And if the Hadawan did choose Neshoba for its special qualities, the 500 acres would particularly display those unique qualities. The rocky hill is a strange and inspiring landscape. The bare bones of the earth are exposed in bleak gray ledge, cliff, and strange long mound-like humps of granite bedrock. How many people have been up there? Oh, that's great. It's a wonderful place. I've been going up there since I was a kid. I was trespassing on the Jenkin lady's land, but just couldn't keep me off it. Such a wonderful place. Narrow trails wind between them, and stone walls of inexplicable origin proliferate. I've got a great story about the stone walls, but I can't tell it because we're getting kicked out at 9.
Excuse me? Is this over near the apple orchard area?
Yes.
A little, yes.
Oh, 'cause it's like right before that house, the bend that has the barn on the other side of the road.
White House?
Yeah, there's a little parking lot there, is that
Yeah. Yep, it's right, there's several parking lots.
Okay.
Did you?
Oh, no, that's what you're saying, that's what you asked people if they piped there?
No, I thought you were asking a question.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to know exactly where you were talking about.
Oh, okay, so you know now?
The apple orchard, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, here's a picture of the Sarod Doublet Forest, just some of that granite outcropping that's all over the place. Okay, the Indian Newtown, this is from an old map we have in Littleton called the Samuel Smith Plat. Thank you, Littleton Historical Society. And here's Long Lake, or I'm sorry, Magog Pond, Fort Pond, here's Acton, here's Littleton, and here is that little 500-acre square right there. This is the Sarod Doublet Forest between here and here. And I contend this is the heart of not only the Vision Quest, but of the heart of the village. Most of the dwellings, I think, would be down here by where Camp Neshoba is today. Okay, we're going to look at traces of the old village. What is there to see now if you're up in the Sarod Doublet Forest? Corn planting mounds, are they? I don't know if you can see them. Boom, 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 boom. This is up by where the chimney is. I don't know if it's the Knapp cottage or the Jenkins cottage, but you can see them quite well there. Okay. And here's another picture of them. They kind of go in rows. They're all nice in rows. And they're kind of square, and they proliferate off into the distance, into the woods. They're harder to see the further you get away from the chimney, but they go all the way across the access road into one of the fields there. Now the thing is, when I was younger, I was really convinced that these were corn planting mounds. Now that I'm have a little more experience under my belt, I'm wondering, would we really be able to see them so distinct after 350 years? Okay, I was talking to a local farmer, Cal Yap, and he told me an interesting story about it was either Knapp or Jenkins, I'm not sure which one. But anyhow, he said, well, you know, she used to grow tomatoes up there. And this is really bad soil. So, you know, what I wonder is, you know how you take wood and you kind of make a wood around a little plot of, and you grow things in. I'm wondering if these were little square wooden squares, you know, mounted up with dirt, tomatoes growing in them, and now the wood has rotted away. This is what we see. So that's a possibility too. And I'm bringing it up because there's a lot of people who go up there and they see these and they go, well, those got to be corn planting mounds, much as I used to think, and now I'm a little more...
Yes, but the two ladies didn't need that many tomatoes.
Good
They
point,
didn't
thank
have a
you.
farm stand.
Right, they weren't making pasta for Prince Spaghetti Day for the nation. Yes, that's a very good point. And like Ann's saying there is that they go everywhere. And so, I mean, where they have a tomato factory up there. But these here seem very regular and very square, so I kind of wonder maybe they were doing some tomatoes there. Okay. Okay, example of a corn planting mound from some Indian recreation village somewhere in the U.S. And you see they're just kind of rounded mounds. That'd be more of what I would expect, and that is more of what you see as you move away from that cottage. You do see them in just kind of random places looking more like this. Okay? And this is from the Henricus Historical Park in Virginia. More corn planting mounds. So this is more what you see the further you get away from the chimneys. Would you agree, Ann? More like this?
Well, I haven't been that.
Okay. Okay, but anyhow, as the more you get away from the chimney, the more you start seeing just kind of random mounds like this, not as quite as big. And that's more what I would expect of corn planting mounds. Okay. Okay, if you're going to have a village, yes, sir?
What chimney are you referring to?
Well, if you park in the main parking lot next to Buttonwood Drive, I think as you come up somewhere around Buttonwood Drive, you take the main trail in from the main kiosk, you get in about 200 feet and there is going to be an opening and just a single chimney standing. And I'm talking about the parking lot with the little red house just a little bit down the road. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I could probably draw you a little map afterwards.
No, so do we know what the chimney is from?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it's from a cottage. There were two ladies that owned that land up there, Knapp and Jenkins, and one of the cottages burned down.
Thanks.
And so that's what it's from, yes. And they donated this land to Littleton, which is just wonderful of them. Okay, if you're going to have an Indian village, you've got to have good water to drink. Fort Pond has never struck me as the kind of place that you could drink water out of. And Lake Magog seems a lot, or Magog Pond seems a lot cleaner, fed by springs, but still you want good spring water. And there's 3 springs up on the Sarod Doublet Forest, and this is one of them here. Okay. And here's another one right here. This one flows all year. And all 3 springs up there, they look like they've been worked. The rocks have been pulled out of them, they've been cleaned out, they have like little channels. So someone spent some work up there at them at some point. Okay, and we're right on pace to be done. I've notated where I am here. We're right on pace to be done at 9, so we've got to keep up this pace to get there. Okay, also up at the Sarod Doublet Forest, the Indian fort at Fort Pond. It was called Fort Pond because there was an Indian fort there. And the Indian fort wasn't a particularly strong fort. In fact, the Neshoba Indians would always bug out in the spring when it was the Mohawk season. The Mohawk would come down and make trouble because they didn't have enough men to man the fort. Where exactly was the fort up in Sarod Doublet Forest? I don't exactly know. But this picture taken about 1890 shows where people in 1890 thought the Indian fort was, and this was the well to the fort, they said. Now, I saw this picture, and it's like, I don't know where that is, but I noticed this fun little rock here with that little nose or whatever it is, and I figured, I'm going to walk those stone walls, I'm going to find that thing. And hard to see in this picture, but there it is. Sure enough, I walked those stone walls, and I found that rock. And so, I can't tell you exactly where the Indian fort was, but I can tell you exactly where people thought it was in 1890. And unfortunately, that well we saw, there was a stone wall and then a well on this side of it. That is on private property, unfortunately. Very, very close to the conservation land, but still on private property. Okay, and this is typically what a Indian fort would look like. I mean, it's just a palisade of trees like this. Now, it would not have been this big. It would have been much smaller in Neshoba. And this picture is showing wigwams. And the only praying Indian village that had the English houses was native. All the other 14 villages, the natives were really living native with a mishmash of English and native clothes. Of course, we've mentioned Sarah Doublet. She was married to Tom Doublet, a Native American, and the name Doublet comes from the fact that due to service to the English during King Philip's War, they gave him this great little doublet, a vest of some sort, a little coat, and so he became known as Tom Doublet because he loved that coat and wore it every day. Okay, another thing up at the Sarod Doublet Forest is in a small colonial quarry, there's this flat stone here, and it's got, someone has pecked out this kind of depression in it. Okay? When you clear everything away, it kind of trails off. Originally I was looking at that and going, are we talking a corn grinding stone here? It's not a colonial lye stone because there isn't, the grooves aren't there. But it kind of trails off, and we're not quite sure why a corn grinding stone would trail off. Yet, someone went through considerable amount of labor up there to peck out this depression. Just to give you an idea between a corn grinding stone, if you haven't seen one before. This is a corn grinding stone here with the grindstone here. And you see, it doesn't trail off. It's kept within a bowl. So you have your meal right here. It's not like going off out the back end like that other stone. So I'm not sure what that other stone is, but an awful lot of work by hand went into it. Okay, here's another corn grinding stone. They have to be up a little bit because if you're down, you can hurt your back. But I keep talking about the corn grinding stones because down here in Acton, near Magog Pond, there's this wonderful stone here. It has this depression in it, this nice smooth depression. And this, to me, looks an awful lot more like a corn grinding stone. So we could very well have one right here in Acton. I know that when I was giving a talk in Boxborough a few years ago, one of the audience members needed a ride home. I gave him a ride home, and she said, "You know, I've got a corn grinding stone in my backyard." Darned if she didn't. Also, up in the Sarod Doublet Forest, there's the white quartz. This will come in later, but I just want to note to you that it's up there. Okay, turtle effigies, signs of the sacred. Okay, Native Americans, the turtle was really important to Native Americans. It has spiritual and religious significance. I don't have a lot of time to go into it, other than to tell you that this is so. And here, this is Magog Hill Road. Here's Magog down here. And this is the hill between Fort Pond and Magog Hill, or Fort Pond and Magog Pond. And here we see this rock formation that looks like a turtle. Okay? Here's a close-up of it, and I think it looks like a snapping turtle. You see the kind of the hook, feet there, head, body. So we have this, I know that there, I think in Carlisle, there is a native site that has been set aside that has an actual turtle rock there. If Tim Fall were here tonight, is he here tonight? If he were here tonight, he could tell us a little bit about that, but I don't see him. Anyhow, so this is a known thing in the area to have a native site with a turtle rock. So it's a thing. Okay. Okay, at one of the parking lots at the Sarod Doublet Forest, you have this flat rock with this, what I wonder, is this a representation of a turtle shell? Because I consider this to be a sacred place. Based on my research, as I'll be explaining more tonight. And here we have the spiritual, religious turtle shell. I emailed this to one of my friends about 15, 16 years ago, and then he sent it back to me. A little turtle drawing. So, I mean, now you really get the sense of it. If you're ever on the internet and you're looking at Tim McSweeney's websites about Native American things, he's got a lot of good information there. Okay, there's also turtle effigies down by, or were turtle effigies down by Lake Magog. These are a little more hard to, these are a little more interpretive, so if you don't see a turtle here, I completely understand. Okay, so got a head, front flipper, or front flipper, is that what they call them? Back flipper, then all these stones here kind of look like the back of a box turtle. So that's how I interpret that. I can't tell you for sure, but this is within the Spirit Quest area, as I consider it to be, down by the lake at Magog. Sadly, this is gone because of the new home construction down behind the pump house. I know John was asking me to go down there and find the darn thing as maybe ammunition to keep this area from being built up, but I'm sorry, it's gone. Okay, next. Okay, back to the colonials here. The early English settlers were also aware of strange boomings and rumblings in the area, especially from within the Neshoba Hill. It was so loud that they likened the sound to cannon shot and said it was as though an army was trapped inside the hill. Barber in 1841 said, "A rumbling noise from time to time has been heard from this hill ever since the settlement of this town. It has been repeated within 2 years past and is called the shooting of Neshoba Hill." The first English settlement in the area began with Ralph Shepard and his son-in-law Walter Powers in 1666. They lived in an area between Magog Pond and Neshoba Hill in a part of Concord village that shared a common border with Neshoba Plantation, Praying Indian Village. The settlement was nearer to the hill than the pond, and Powers actually lived on the lower slopes of Neshoba Hill in the old Garrison House. Both families would have heard these cannon shots, and are no doubt the people referred to as hearing the noises ever since the settlement of this town. Okay, the Garrison House is gone, but the well remains. This is obviously newer construction, but if you look down inside there, you're going to see a well that's got a date from about 1666, because the first structure was about 30 yards that way, and they had to have a well. So there it is. Okay, next please. Okay, just speaking of the Garrison House, the Powers Garrison House, We know from Concord records that there were 5 or 6 garrison houses in the area, but they refer to the Powers House actually as being an Indian fort. And some of the other sources we have about the Garrison House is that it was some kind of a block house. So rather than it looking like a colonial house with a lot of extra thick bulking in the walls, the old Powers House actually looked an awful lot more like this. This is just a picture I nabbed off the internet, but it gives you an idea of what a log block house actually looked like. So it was a fairly unique structure for the area. Typically, the garrison houses were actual colonials with extra thick walls. Just a little side fact for you there. Okay, the rumblings became part of the fabric of Littleton life, so much so that a one-page write-up on Littleton in Mason Varney's Almanac reads as follows. The most noted eminence is Neshoba Hill on the eastern border. From this settlement, a rumbling noise is sometimes heard, which is locally called the shooting of Neshoba Hill. The same year, Herbert Harwood refers to Daniel Gookin's 1647 observation of the rumblings as follows. Traditions are plenty of rumbling noises, sometimes said to be like the discharge of cannon in the vicinity of Neshoba Hill. These traditions and noises associated with Neshoba Hill have survived up to the modern era. As of April 1957, Carolyn Webster noted in her newspaper column that Neshoba Hill is a curiosity because of the rumblings which have been known to emanate from it in the past and in recent years. And all this is going to come together as Neshoba being a Spirit Quest site. We've just got to go through some stuff to get there. Okay, so we're going to talk about seismology here. We'll talk about earthquakes, so let's find out why. Neshoba Hill still booms and does so during earthquakes. Neshoba has always been an area of concentrated seismic activity. The old Newberry-Clinton Fault runs practically under Neshoba Hill as it passes southwest between Littleton Common and Magog Pond. For some reason, the Littleton section of the fault is very active as an epicenter. In the last 70 years alone, there have been at least 20 recorded earthquakes centered in Neshoba, averaging 2.2 on the Richter scale. And when I say centered on Neshoba, I really mean centered on Neshoba. That square of red I showed you in a few slides back, I mean, that is where it's happening. It's not happening here, 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 here. It's happening right here under the village. Okay, a couple of notable earthquakes in Neshoba. Okay, let's see, this one in 1990, 3.6 on the Richter scale. Well, at that particular time, I lived in Littleton Common in the farmhouse, the Cataldo farmhouse out on the other side of the shop. I was renting that, and I was sitting in my study, and there was this massive explosion. Kabam! The whole house like jolted like it had been smacked with a truck, and it sounded like something had exploded in the house, I was sure. But really, it was just the earthquake. And I can assure you that it is just a massive, massive explosive sound like cannons. I've been up to Fort Ticonderoga, and it sounds like a cannon. Okay, and here's another one from 2007. Some of you may remember that one, I'm not sure. But we have had recent ones. I think in the past 15 years, me and my wife have moved back to Littleton. We're living near Neshoba Hill. In the past 15 years or so, I think we've had at least 3 earthquakes. Sound about right now? Okay, and like I said, they are really concentrated in one place. This is Neshoba here. Look at that. Each one of these little yellow things is an earthquake. The bigger the earthquake, the bigger the square. But look at that. I mean, they are right here. It's not like here, there, and everywhere. It's right here. Okay, let's find out about our earthquakes. The October 19, 2007 earthquake was reported on the news as a product of the Newberry-Clinton Fault. However, earthquakes in Massachusetts are of a more complex origin. For starters, the Newberry-Clinton Fault is an artifact of a previous age and has not been active in over a million years. Now, when we have these earthquakes and the news comes on, they always say Clinton-Newberry Fault, but they just haven't dug deep enough. That thing has not gone up, that hasn't been active for millions of years. Okay, rather, the earthquakes in the vicinity are the product of geologic features called plutons. The Pluton earthquake connection was discovered in 1975 when the Nuclear Regulatory Commission required Pilgrim Unit 2 in Plymouth to address the validity of seismic guidelines used in the design of the plant. Plutons, named after Pluto, the god of the underworld, are 100-million-year-old cylindrical shafts of pooled magma with depths of 30 miles or more. It was found that all the major earthquakes in eastern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire were centered on these plutons. And they're not very big in size, half a mile at the most, so they're just small shafts coming up. Okay, further, the seismically active plutons were discovered to have magnetic and gravitational anomalies. Okay, here's some aeromagnetic maps here. This aeromagnetic survey in 1975 confirmed that the circular magnetic anomalies corresponded to the plutons. So where they found these magnetic anomalies, they found the plutons. And as for the earthquakes, these are caused by linear stresses pressing against the less compressible rock of the cylindrical pluton. So essentially what's happening, you've got this shaft coming out like this with all this other stuff around it, and they tweak a little bit. And when those tweak, you have an earthquake, and you have it right there, not in some random place. So that's why they're centered right here, because there's a pluton under Neshoba village. Okay. Where there are circular magnetic anomalies, there are plutons, and where these plutons also exhibit gravitational anomalies, there are earthquakes. Now, I don't understand the full science of that, but that's what they say. The real point of the matter is, that is the Neshoba pluton right there. That's the one that's causing us all our interesting boomings and soundings and hummings and God knows what else, and why I believe it is a Spirit Quest site. Earthquakes have been recorded here since the earliest colonial times, and they have been recorded in conjunction with noise activity, a significant piece of the puzzle. The Littleton Town Clerk's report of 1896, referencing John Eliot, had this to say: "He came to this place to visit his wards, and in his writings are found allusions in Neshoba Hill into a great crack in the earth here, made here by an earthquake previous to 1670. Eliot described this crack as a vast hiatus in the earth that created immense cavities under the rocks. The location of this crack is unrecorded, but it is assumed it was somewhere on or about Neshoba Hill. Neshoba Hill means the hill that shakes. Gookin also equates the rumblings of the hill with earthquakes. He said, some have considered the hill adjacent as hollow, wherein the wind being pent is the cause of this rumbling, as in earthquakes." So the colonials, they understood that these sounds were coming from the earthquakes. Okay. In 1890, Herbert Harwood follows suit and equates the rumbling noises and sounds to the discharge of cannon with seismic activity, referring to the noises as probably earthquakes. This is the popular explanation for the noises, and Littleton Legends columnist Carolyn Webster concurs. In writing about the Neshoba noises in 1957, she informs us that a few years ago there were earth tremors felt at Cobb's Chicken Farm, not far from Neshoba Hill. Present-day geologists advance their theories on the booming of Neshoba, but so far none have been proven. Although I think at this time we're pretty clear that the noises go with the earthquakes. Cobb's Chicken Farm was located on Pickard Lane in Littleton, about halfway between Neshoba Hill and Magog Pond. It's now the Montessori School. And I don't know how many people here went to school in Littleton, but when I was in Shaker Lane, you got to go to Cobb's Chicken Farm and hold the chickens. That was just a great thing. Strange lights. Someone asked me earlier about earthquake lights, and well, yes indeed, we got them here. And that's another piece of the puzzle. In conjunction with the seismic activity, there have been reports of strange aerial lights. This is not as odd as it may seem, as the theory of earthquake lights has received considerable attention in the past few years. In short, it is thought that the pre- and post-seismic stresses, particularly in which the explosive process of rock fracture causes electrons emitted from fresh broken surfaces to bombard the surrounding air and excite it to produce light. This theory explains satisfactorily how both large and small earthquakes which break the Earth's surface can produce light. Such phenomena as bright lights floating amongst treetops, luminous dust clouds moving along near the ground, sequential flashes from different points on the hillside, and fireballs on the horizon can be explained by earthquakes and are seen to appear at fault zones. If anyone's interested in that, I have a citation of it, and I can email that to you if you're interested in earthquake lights and where I got this quote. Following a 3.1 magnitude earthquake in Neshoba in October 15, 1985, described as the rumblings of a freight train. And I gotta tell you, there's the big booms, and then there's the rumbling of the freight train. I think one we had about 7 years ago, it was like a freight train. It really was, just like through the air it sounded, like you think earthquakes under the ground, but it just went ripping through the air over the house. It seemed just an amazing and startling event. And you can see how that would really catch the attention of anyone who lived here, be they colonials or Native Americans. Okay, go back one. Thank you. Okay, in this earthquake, there appeared yellow-orange, brightly glowing pockets of air in the Woodchuck Hill and Oak Hill region area on the Harvard-Boxborough border. This part of the Oak Hill Ridge is just 1.5 miles southwest of the old Neshoba praying Indian village, and is high enough to be seen from the village. Now, the important thing to bear in mind here, I'm saying it's 1.5 miles from the old village. The village was a square that the English drew on paper, and the Native Americans who lived there previous to that, they weren't drawing squares on paper. This was the old village, the area around it was Neshoba. So 1.5 miles out doesn't matter, it's just part of that significant area. So, we kind of have to look at things through Native American eyes and not necessarily English surveying squares on paper eyes. Okay, now we go. Okay, so earthquake lights. I mentioned the orange-yellow colors. Well, here's a photograph of some earthquake lights taken in Japan. I found this on the internet. And you can see the kind of the yellowish-orange colors. And these happen just before, just after earthquakes. And that would be that would really catch your attention, I think, no matter who you are. Okay. The orange lights recorded by the beacon are particularly significant. A recent scientific publication relates a series of fault line laboratory experiments on granite rock in which researchers observed luminescence in light that was bright enough to be seen by the naked eye. The lights appeared on the fault plane of the granite and were described as predominantly violet, blue, and orange, and you just saw the orange variety. From my own experience, at the time of the November 23, 1980 Neshoba earthquake of 2.5 intensity, I observed at night from the vantage point of Magog Pond a bright welling up of intense light out of the top of Fort Pond Hill, the Sarod Doublet forest, in the heart of the old 500-acre set-aside. This welled up like a dome of light about 350 yards across, about 200 yards tall at its peak. After about 3 seconds, the light then collapsed back into the earth, and it was observed with a friend. I wasn't out there alone. It was just like this light, just like went whoop, and whoop, but it was really big. But it couldn't have been more than a few seconds, whoop, and whoop. That was right at the time of that earthquake. Since I've been presenting this talk in the local area, a number of people have come forward to share with me their own experiences of light phenomena in Neshoba. For example, an elderly man on Star Hill in Littleton, that's at one end of Long Lake, had light balls roll through his house one night, and an employee at Neshoba Hill ski area in Westford describes a recent dome of light at Magog Pond similar to the one I saw. Okay. This is another picture off the internet of an earthquake light, and this is so much like what I saw, just exactly like that, except it came up and it went down pretty darn quickly. But it's just really interesting, for me at least, to say that, hey, this thing I saw, which I believe is an earthquake light, looks exactly like known earthquake lights. And we're halfway through, and I think we're going to do it. Okay, excellent. Okay, here's Magog Pond. I don't know how many of you go down to Magog Pond. I defy Concord all the time to do it. Yeah, this is Big Rock. Some of you may know it. I'm looking up here at Magog Hill Road, Sarod Doublet Forest. And when I saw this earthquake light, I was out here on these low rocks. When the water's down, there's some low rocks you can get out on. And I was looking up here and saw it come up like that. Just for some of you, I don't know if you know this, but Lake Magog was actually 10 feet lower than it is today. It was dammed up for some mills downstream. So this island in Lake Magog right here, that actually is the point of land. This was just a point sticking out from the mainland here. And at the time, in native and colonial times, there were no islands in Lake Magog because the water was 10 feet lower. So that little causeway you drive between Lake Magog and the little mall there, that actually, it is a causeway because they had to build it up because when the water came up, it flooded both sides of it. But previous to that, no islands. Okay. Going back to the fact that Eliot allowed the Indians to make their own choice of location for their praying villages, they certainly chose a place in Neshoba where many strange and wondrous characteristics are concentrated and occur regularly. These are rumblings and hummings from the earth, seismic activity, strange light phenomena, and I do not think that is coincidence. Okay, so now we're going to do some comparative study. We're going to go and we're going to talk about a known place of vision quest. And as I go through this place in Haddam called the Mound, be thinking of what we saw in Neshoba, because you're going to start seeing some parallels here. The lights, rumblings, and earthquakes at Neshoba are hardly without precedent. This has been going on in a place known as Moodus in East Haddam, Connecticut, for as long and with much more attention. Moodus is an abbreviation of Hockomock, which is the local Wangunk dialect, means there is a bad noise. Apparently, as I read through some of this stuff, I mean, you're just going to be like, yeah, that is a bad noise. As a reference to the strange sounds heard there. These noises were reported by colonials as early as 1668 and centered on Mount Tom, located on a neck of land between East Haddam and the village of Moodus, all of which was purchased from the Indians in 1662. The sounds were described at the time as crackings and rumblings that were compared to fusillades, to thunder, a roaring in the air, to the breaking of rocks, to reports of cannon, and to rocks falling into immense caverns and bouncing off underground cliffs as they fell. Sometimes the sounds and tremors would roll out of the north and pass underneath and break like a severe thunderclap, shaking the houses and all in them. These were so numerous that Reverend Hosmer, the first minister in Haddam, wrote in 1729 that he had heard several hundred such noises, both fearful and dreadful, within 20 years, sometimes daily. And this is an awful lot like what goes on in Neshoba, except there's more happening here than happens in Neshoba. This is more active. Okay, so here is Moodus and Mount Tom, particularly town of Moodus over here, Mount Tom here, tidal flats, this is near the ocean. And Mount Tom, which is the center of these explosions in Moodus, is about 314 feet tall from water level or sea level, and Neshoba Hill is 426, which is the center of the noises here. But Neshoba stands at about 100 feet level anyway, so they both rise about 300 feet from the ground. Okay. Earthquakes and lights. The region of Moodus is historically one of the three most seismically active places in New England, the others being Ossipee, New Hampshire, and northeastern Massachusetts, including the Neshoba Hill area. On November 4, 1667, John Eliot recorded in his diary a series of earthquakes, including the now familiar attendant noises and aerial lights. There were strange noises in the air, like guns and drums. An earthquake shock was felt after there had been prodigies in the heavens the night before. So prodigies are strange things seen in the sky, and the only strange thing you're going to see in the sky at night is a light. So I believe we're talking about earthquake lights here. On March 16, 1668, he wrote, "The shock of an earthquake felt, prodigies were seen in the heavens the night before." So once again, in conjunction with an earthquake, or just before, just after, once again, lights in the sky, earthquake lights. And that was really going to catch your attention, from a religious, spiritual sense, I believe, amongst Native Americans. The noises and vibrations were intense enough to agitate the waters of the river. In January 1663, a tremendous earthquake shook northeastern North America. French writers relate that forest trees were seen all in violent motion, some thrown up by the roots, then with their tops bending nearly to the ground, first on one side, then on another, or laid prostrate on the surface, from which again they were thrown up into the air. Further, we are told that rocks from the bottoms of rivers and lakes were thrown up into the air with the ice. From this came terrible noises, the convulsions producing the most awful and incessant sounds, roaring at one time like the sea, then reverberating like the rolling of thunder, and again as if the mountains were bursting, and the rocks which composed them cracking and rolling over each other. There was light phenomena as well. The darkness was rendered more awful by frequent flashes of lightning. All this was topped off 10 days later by a loud rumbling noise, seemingly occasioned by the detonation of the atmosphere. And once again, I know from my experience in Littleton, you don't hear the sounds under the ground, you hear them up above your head. It sounds like it's happening up there. A 1797 earthquake in Moodus resulted in stones of several hundred tons found removed from their places, and fissures were found in immovable rocks. Added to this, the roaring of the atmosphere was most tremendous. Okay, Indian powwows, or powwows, just another word for shaman, used historically, back in the 1660s or so, were seen as priests with certain powers, according to James Mavor and Byron Dix in Manitou. They say they could make rocks move and trees dance. And this sounds uncannily like the above quoted descriptions of seismic activity upon rocks and trees in the 1663 and 1793 earthquakes, and in significant earthquakes in general. Surely there is a link between Indian shaman and earthquakes. According to Mavor and Dix, the Indians local to Moodus were known for their religious activity and served as priests or shamans to the, but was understood to be good. Hockomock was seen and prayed to and was of a more earthly and ambivalent quality. He was not a devil as such, the Indians had no devil figure, but was rather a dark and powerful side of nature. The Indians prayed to him to heal wounds and cure diseases. And when a disease was curable, Hockomock was considered responsible for both the condition and the cure. If it was not curable, it was just considered the will of Kitchen. As the most day-to-day operative spirit, Hockomock was the most sought-after deity in vision quests by the powwow shaman. He was invoked musically and with rhythmical practices, I assume dance, and was said by the successful spirit quester to protect and empower those who obtained visions of him. However, to Puritan eyes, those who sought visions of Hockomock were perceived as seeking the devil. Hockomock as a place name means place where spirit dwells. For instance, the Hockomock Swamp is one such place named after Hockomock. And the Hockomock Swamp is down in the Raynham-Taunton area. It's a massive, massive swamp. Okay. And here's a picture I took of the Hockomock Swamp. And it's got a lot of paranormal activity down there. I can't vouch for this, but people say, you got your Bigfoots, you got your UFOs, you got your Puckwudgies, which are these little short guys that do nasty things to each other. That's what they are. Giant birds, I think bigger than condors, giant snakes, big around as barrels, cattle mutilations, ghost lights, ghost trains, phantom hitchhikers, you name it, they got it. Anyhow, can't say, there you go. I'm just kind of drawing a connection between this spirit with Hockomock and strange stuff. Okay, let's talk about the king under the mountain. Legend of Puritan times relate that witchcraft was at the root of the Buddhist noises. Now we're talking about colonial issues here, not Native American witchcraft being a colonial thing. It was said that the Haddam witches who practiced black magic met the Buddhist witches who used white magic in a cave beneath Mount Tom. Of course, Mount Tom is the center of all these noises, and fought them in the light of a great carbuncle, which is just a really weird old name for a gem, that was fastened to the roof. If the witch fights were continued too long, the king of Makamoodis, who sat on a throne of solid sapphire in the cave whence the noises came, raised his wand. Then the light of the carbuncle went out. Okay. Peals of thunder rolled through the rocky chambers, and the witches rushed into the air. Thus, the king of the bad noises resides enthroned within the mountain itself, wherefrom emanate the rumblings and explosive thundercaps. To quote Mavor and Dix, who also came to the same conclusion, that Hockomock resides within the rumbling hill. The shaman of Hockomock, the shaman sought Hockomock, especially in locations such as the summit of Mount Moodus, another name for Mount Tom, where the depths of the mountain are considered the home of Hockomock, who makes the bad noises. Now this king under the mountain business, just stick that in your back of your mind, because we're going to come back to that, because do you think that maybe Neshoba has a king under the mountain? I wouldn't be bringing this up for nothing. Okay. Okay, the voice of Hockomock. Hockomock was certainly sought after, especially in places like Mount Moodus, which was considered his abode. He could speak in subterranean thunderings as well as through the quiet subtleties of rocks and stones. There are a number of perched stones in the Moodus area. Given even the slightest tremor, these will gently rock, which was an indication of the spirit of his presence to the discerning shaman. So anyhow, this is the rolling rock in Fall River, and there are a ton of these perched rocks in Massachusetts and New England, and many of them in historical times rock, being like you take 2 fingers and you can make these multi-ton boulders with just a couple of fingers. In more historical times, they don't seem to be working as much. I think it's just people have screwed with them. But I have a friend who tracks down boulders in Massachusetts, as things boulders, and he's done considerable research, and he has shown that within the past 100 years, most of these rocking stones actually rocked. This one's in Fall River. It's called the Rolling Rock, and if you've ever had Rolling Rock beer, and please say no, it's named after this. That's what Rolling Rock comes from, Rolling Rock beer. It's named after the stone. Okay, please. Certainly the rumblings and rockings were the manifestations and voice of Hockomock, and shaman came from all over New England to seek him in such places with the qualities of Moodus. The power of Hockomock to move the rocks and trees became associated with the Hockomock-seeking shaman of seismically active areas. Thus, it is no exaggeration spiritually that their powers were specifically said to be the power to make rocks move and trees dance. This is an identification with the powers of their deity in places like Moodus, where these shamans' secret sites, sacred sites. Now, one thing I forgot to mention back in the other slide there, the whole point of these rocking stones is that when there was an earthquake, or even just the slightest tremor that you may not even feel, these stones are going to start moving like this, rocking of their own accord. And that is what was called the voice of Hockomock. So Hockomock would speak in these stones, and the shaman would interpret the movements. And remember, the shaman were the ones who could make rocks move and trees dance. Actually, it was Hockomock, but it's an identification that came to the shaman as well, the cloak of Hockomock on them, so to speak. Okay, Maver and Dix, who I quote an awful lot in this. I don't know, have anyone here read Manitou? Okay, that's great. Yeah, it's a wonderful book. If you haven't read Manitou by Maver and Dix, you should go out and get it. You'll gain a lot of insight into local lithics, stones. The history of Buddhists, the history of the Moodus area attests to participation of the native shamans with the geophysically active landscapes that moved and produced noises and light. This follows a pattern among cultures all over the world that have attributed religious significance to glowing forms that appear at areas of reoccurring earthquakes. So this is something I've been saying right along, that having these earthquakes, having these strange noises, and having these glowing lights is going to grab your attention religiously, and they're saying it too, that it focuses religious activity on these places. And as in Moodus, so in Neshoba. Yes. Okay, Charles Skinner in 1896 links Moodus back to Neshoba as follows. Now I bring this up because I'm not the first person to say, hey, these places look similar. It was known back in 1896 that there was a connection between Moodus and Neshoba. This isn't something new. It just never was much followed up on. Such cases are not singular. A phenomena similar to the Moodus noises and locally known as the shooting of Neshoba Hill occurs at times in the eminence of that name near East Littleton, Massachusetts. A strange deep rumbling was attributed by the Indians to whirlwinds trying to escape from caves. This is a picture of Neshoba Hill. It's not looking very big and it's not looking very threatening. I took this from Power Road. You can see the ski slopes over here. Okay, now we're going to get into Neshoba as a Vision Quest site. Skinner is correct to cite Neshoba Hill because the Neshoba praying Indian village bears all the same qualities as Buddhist, except on a smaller scale. Just aren't as many noises as often, and it's just a small area. It is an epicenter of seismic activity from the earliest recorded times up to the present. There is a hill that rumbles and thunders. Light phenomena are seen here in conjunction with earthquakes, and it is a site specifically chosen by the Indians themselves. Elliot did not say, hey, you guys go live over there. He said, where do you want to live? And they said, we're living here. And that is significant. They chose it. They wanted it to be there. Recall that Elliot allowed the Indians in 1651 to choose the location of their new villages. These 16 square mile plantations were granted by deed to Indian ownership, thus protecting them from the usual encroachment and overrunning typical of the English. When Secum Tehadawon chose Neshoba, its close proximity to Concord was questioned. Eliot thought they would have preferred a location that was further away with more game and less encroached from the English. Eliot questioned Tehadawon on this, and Tehadawon was adamant. Neshoba it would be. Well, the thing was, Neshoba had been hunted out, and it was really close to Concord. And Eliot saying, why on earth would you want to live so close to us? You need room, you need game, you need these things. He's like, no way. It's going to be right here, absolutely. And I think there was a reason for that. It seems likely, considering the circumstances involved, that Tehadawon was using the opportunity to reserve away a site sacred to Hockomock from being overrun by the English. However sincere he may or may not have been as a convert, he would have been savvy enough to take advantage of the opportunity presented to him. After all, Neshoba was his principal residence, and he would have been more aware than anyone of its significance. But as a permanent village site, which a praying Indian village would be, Neshoba was lacking the game required to support a community. Normal Indian ways were to move their villages several times a year to follow the seasons of harvest and game. Clearly, there were other factors involved. The early praying Indian villages may all have been situated at sites chosen by the Indians for special qualities. When Mabry and Dix laid out the original 7 Indian plantations on a map of seismic activity, they noticed that 4 of the villages, including Neshoba, fell on linear faults, while another 2 were adjacent to anomalies. And we know now that anomalies correspond with plutons, correspond with earthquakes. According to Mabry and Dix, this impressive correlation of seismic activity with the locations of praying Indian villages supports our theory that these places were selected in part because of their seismic activities, which indicated they were the abodes of the spirit Hockomock. And here's the map that they talk about that I just referenced. These are rivers here, ignore them. But up here you see the linear faults, and everything in black is some kind of an anomaly or linear fault. In red are the 7 original villages. And they said 4 of the 7 fell right in these Pluton earthquake centers. If you get Manitou by Mabry and Dix, you can look at this more closely. The roaring and storming associated with earthquakes brings to mind the water monster said to live in Magog Pond, if the book Trespassing is correct. Its qualities are similar to the Algonquin stories of the horned serpentine watered panther, which lived in lakes and could cause storms and roar like a storm, and even destroy villages by earthquake, making the connection overt between the serpentine water panther and areas of seismic activity. I'm not sure that apsinic, Mitchell's description of apsinic, I'm just not really too sure about that, but he is at least placing or drawing on folklore of some kind of water monster in the Magog. Further, the Neshoba Indians felt the noise phenomenon was centered on Magog Pond, not Neshoba Hill, bringing the connection back to the horned water panther, or more correctly, what it symbolizes, earthquakes. It is my opinion that the praying Indian villages, especially Neshoba Plantation, were located at sacred places chosen by the Indians in areas in which they and their ancestors had ritualized. Is there any indication of such ritualization at Neshoba? The answer is yes. For starters, there were 8 underground stone chambers local to the old Indian plantation. 6 in Littleton, 1 in Harvard, 1 in Acton. Of the 6 that fell within the exact bounds of the Neshoba plantation, 2 of the ones in Littleton have since been destroyed, and a further Littleton chamber is since lost, said to have been at the northwestern foot of Neshoba Hill. There are chambers in Moodus, and Maver and Dix consider these and other chambers to be Kiva-like vision quest sites. Okay, now here is a chamber in Littleton. This is on Whitcomb Ave, right next to the Whitcomb House, built in 1701. And you see it's just got this little hole, but when you go in, you can stand up in it. But this has been heavily reworked. This is not how it looked originally. Originally, you could walk into it, but the Whitcombs turned it into a tomb for a while, and there's Whitcomb folklore that one particular John Whitcomb, everyone who lived at that farm was named John Whitcomb. Apparently it was a requirement. And this John Whitcomb would play his trumpet in there. But anyhow, this has been heavily reworked. Burn this image in your mind, and we're going to move to the next slide. This is how it looked 100 years ago. It looks, you can walk right in. It's not all boarded, all rocked up and whatnot. So most chambers are walk-in like this. They're not like come through the top and then go down. And if you do have to crawl in, they stay narrow and you have to crawl the whole way. So this is more like I would expect the chamber to be, because this is more like what the chambers in the area look like. Okay? Just down the street still on Whitcomb Road, you come to this one here. Doesn't this look an awful lot like the old picture I just showed you? Like they were built out of the same pattern. And you can walk right in there. It's really, really interesting. It's right clearly on the road, has its own mailbox. Well, the thing about these chambers is, what the heck are they? You know, Maver and Dick say that they're Vision Quest Kivas, and that may well be, and I lean towards that as well, but it hasn't really been conclusively proven what these chambers actually are or when they were built. If you talk with mainstream archaeology, they're going to say that these are colonial root cellars. That may well be the case. It just, there is still some debate out there. I belong to an organization called NERA, New England Antiquities Research Association, and they've been investigating things like chambers for the past 40 years. They're a great group, but you know, it really hasn't been conclusively proven who built them or for what.
I think that's what they said when I took a tour of that. They said it was a root cellar.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, that is one of the things you will hear. Okay, and in Acton, we have the Neshoba Brook Chamber, and this is in its bad old days. The next one. And here it is. It has been reconstructed. I forget which Acton organization did this. Trails and Times. Yes, sir.
Did you do it?
Yes, I'm Linda McElroy,
Oh,
and
hi,
I
Linda.
directed the project. This is one of about 12 sites on a 2-mile loop around the Neshoba Brook in North Acton, where there are stone remains of both colonial and, we think, Native American sites. And also, I think it's also a ceremonial site.
Mm-hmm. I would agree with you, Linda, and thanks for sharing that. You folks did a marvelous job in renovating that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
That doesn't look like a root cellar to me. Animals could get in there.
Yeah, you just walk right there.
To eat the food.
Yeah.
They'd never build it like
The door that's shut.
Okay, this is inside the Acton chamber. You walk in, and then it kind of doglegs around into a little smaller alcove in there. Now the thing is, you know, it's been asked, you know, like, is the Acton chamber in Neshoba? And, you know, it's once again, how do you look at it? Do you look at it as a square that the English drew on a piece of paper, or do you look at it as an area? And of course, the Indians would have looked at it as an area. So although this does not fall within the perfect square, well, it's never a perfect square, but it doesn't fall within the bounds, it doesn't mean that it wasn't within the area of Vision Quest of Neshoba. So I see no problem with saying that, yeah, this Acton chamber is within the Vision Quest area. Now, I mentioned that there were 8 of them originally in the area. The thing is, they were right here in the area. You have to go a bit of a ways to find more of them. But there were 8 concentrated right here, which says once again that they were concentrated here for a purpose and a reason. Because you don't just go over to Chelmsford or Lowell and start finding more of them. You don't. You have to move out quite a bit before they start coming up again. And here's one up on Bear Hill in Harvard, and this one is actually a double dogleg chamber, which the front has fallen down. And so and to get into it, we're talking about root cellars. Well, this one here, what you have to do, the passageway is really no taller than this. You have to crawl, crawl. Then you would crawl in here, crawl. And then you would crawl like this over to here to where the chamber is. And the chamber is just a little beehive chamber that you have to, scrunch down like this in. So why would a root cellar have a double dog leg and be all scrunched down like that? I can't answer that question, but I tend to think that there might be something more to these than root cellars, and this is one of the chambers that makes me think so. Okay, chambers in Sarod Doublet forests. Okay, well, a good friend of mine about 25, 30 years ago, who really knows a lot of lore in the area, he was saying to me, well, Sarod Doublet used to live in a cave up in the Sarod Doublet forest. And it's like, Andy, there's no caves in the Sarod Doublet forest. He's like, no, seriously, caves. But we all know there's no caves in the Sarod Doublet forest. Well, one day, about 20 some odd years ago, I was out going for a little stroll through the Sarod Doublet forest, and a big group of people came down the trail, dogs and everything. I just wasn't feeling like really outgoing. I said, I don't really want to deal with people. So I kind of like backed off into the woods, and I scrunched down next to this tree so I wouldn't have to interact with them. That's true, I just wanted to be alone. And as I'm scrunched down, I see right to my, here's the tree, I see right to my side, there's this black hole going into the darkness. I look, well, there's this hole in here, and where does it go? And so I got a flashlight, and I shine the flashlight in, and I find there's a chamber in here, and well, it's underneath this big slab of granite that has been pulled aside from the mother stone here by about 3 feet. So it's been pulled aside to fit over this cavity. And here's the tree that is actually in front of the entrance. There was an entrance there, but the tree grew right up in front of it. Okay? Now here's inside of it. It's actually about 7 feet long, about 3 to 4 feet wide. And at the moment, it's between 12 to 14 feet tall. So I mean, it's not much. But there is about 12 to 14 feet. I think I meant 12 to 14 inches. Yeah, 12 to 14 inches. And underneath it, there's about 12 to 14 inches of debris that's built up. I plumbed it with a rod to see. So, I mean, you would actually have about this much. And not much, I don't think that's much of a cave for Sarod Doublet, but that would make a nice vision quest or a kiva. If you're having some kind of a vision quest ceremony, you are actually going to be spending a lot of time quietly in these kivas. And one thing that's come to mind about them, they're all on bedrock. And we know about radon. I just wondered, does radon play some kind of a role in the Vision Quest experience here in the Linear? I don't have an answer. It's just something to toss out there. Okay, the Sarod Doublet Forest has this massive glacier erratic right in the middle of it, in this area that I feel is the sacred Vision Quest center. It appears exactly like the perch stones or the rocking stones down in Moodus, and would be known for the voice of Hockomock. Now this one doesn't actually rock. I don't know if it ever rocked. I would like to think it rocked because it would be part of my thesis that this is a sacred Vision Quest site, and therefore you would have to have a big stone that rocks. There's got to be one. That's just part of the landscape. And it looks like it's actually slipped off its pedestal a bit. But I can't tell you that it actually rocked. I can only say, there's that stone, and that's the kind of thing we would look for. Absolutely a perch stone, and ideally a rocking stone. Okay. Well, when you go down to Magog Pond, and I'm glad to say this still exists, has not been overdeveloped, and I think it's actually a conservation land, Acton conservation land. There is this big boulder on top of bedrock, and There's a lot of debris under there, so I can't get it to move, but I'm really wondering if someone from the Acton Conservation Commission would ever like to go down there, dig out that debris, and see if we got ourselves a rocking stone right here on the edge of the pond.
Are these stones deliberately placed there by someone, or they
Well, you know, that's,
glaciers left them? That's what
that's a good question. Some of them are so big, there's no way they could be deliberately placed. And we know that the glaciers just left these erratics everywhere. So whether the smaller ones were placed and the larger ones were opportunity, I don't know. But certainly we have a lot, at least in historical times, that did rock. Okay, as for actual rocking stones, it's just not a matter of saying, this one may have rocked, or we think it rocked, or whatever. This one rocks. Okay? This one totally rocks. This is over in Harvard, down by the Shaker Village, and it's about 1 ton. And me and my daughter went down there last winter. We stood right here, and you can take 2 fingers and boink, 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 and the whole thing rocks. So there really and truly are rocking stones right here in the area of Neshoba, and that one is still doing its thing. Okay, so as far as ritual sites, we've talked about the landscape, the sacred landscape, and there's other places in Neshoba that have been identified as Native American ritual sites. And one of them is the Boxborough Esker. It's about a mile away from the Sarod Forest. It's still within the square bounds, not that that fully matters. And this is a solstice sunrise site, among other things. From a stone slab viewing platform on the midwinter solstice, you will observe the sun rising across the field from a notch in the halves of a large outcrop of bedrock. There's also a midsummer solstice sunrise that can be viewed from the platform, but it's not really that convincing in my opinion. I know that a person who knows the area well is here tonight. George, what is your opinion, if I don't mind me asking you, what is your opinion on the midsummer sighting? Do you think that's valid? Up at Half Moon Meadow?
Well, now, you mentioned that this was up at the Esker. No, it's not.
What?
This site isn't up at the Esker.
No.
Oh, you know,
The eastern part of Boxborough.
you're absolutely right, George. I got a little discombobulated there. You are absolutely right. I got ahead of myself. This is not at the Boxborough Esker. Sorry, I'm glad I talked to you and picked that up.
Oh, well, the only other thing I wanted to say is that this is on land that's now owned by the Sudbury Valley trustees. And so you can go over and see this.
Excellent. So anyone can go here at any time. Sudbury Valley trustees own it. And thanks for pointing that out. This is not at the Esker. I just got a little ahead of myself there. And something else we do know about this is that an old Indian trail went very near, within about 30 or 40 feet of the rock, which I'll show you in a minute. And I know that because I pulled some old deeds here from 1725, and they're talking about an Indian trail that runs right through there. So we know the Indian trail went from the Indian Newtown up in the Sarod Doublet right by this sunrise site. So let's take a look at this sunrise site. Okay, here it is here. This is the notch that the sun rises through. And here's the boulders on either side. Some people look at this and they see maybe a bear, maybe a turtle, being the head, being the body, being paws or whatnot. And it does have that appearance. Okay. So this is the sunrise right here, and I took this photograph at a sunrise get-together we all had up there, which George led. Very kind to lead that, and it was my first opportunity to actually see the sunrise from that rock. And like I said, there is another alignment. It's a midsummer alignment. It's just really hard to tell about that one because there's so many trees that have grown up. And you can go here anytime, so if you want to go here at midwinter sunrise, feel free. Okay. Now, just a little fun fact here, and George, I'm sure will appreciate this, is that just literally a stone's throw from that Native American site, we feel it's a Native American sunrise site. Well, the last witchcraft accusation in Massachusetts happened in 1720, right in Littleton, which is now Foxborough, how Littleton is now Boxborough. And it was the Blanchard girls accusing Mrs. Dudley, and they did all the usual, tricks, rolling on the floor, saying they're being harassed and everything. That never actually went to trial, but it was the last accusations. And my understanding, it was the Blanchard girls, and this is a Blanchard house. But at the time, it was likely that the Blanchard girls lived in a house that sat right in front of that. And then was, when they made some money off a railroad coming through, they made a much bigger house behind it, possibly used timbers from it. So I just think it's really interesting that these strange witchcraft accusations were going literally a stone's throw from George's house. Not that he had anything to do with it. Okay, so now we're over at the Boxborough Esker. Finally got myself straightened out here. Okay. This also was in the original bounds of the plantation as, paper map. This site is a series of 3 large earthen circles, each surrounded by a ditch that Maver and Dix believed to have Indian ritual significance. It is located next to Muddy Pond on the eastern side of the Boxborough Esker on Beaver Brook. It is significant that this esker runs its length dead center along the Newberry-Clinton Fault. In fact, some geologists think that certain fault line eskers are the result of soil liquidifications in high magnitude earthquakes rather than glacier-related soil deposits. I just think that's interesting because it really runs on that fault. Here's this really serpentine, snaky thing that's 30, 40 feet high that just shoots right through the woods next to Beaver Brook. There are also several prayer seats at the Boxborough Esker site and a solstice. Well, I'm not really sure. I don't remember. It's some kind of a sunset alignment. It might be solstice, might be equinox. Just can't remember. Okay. Now, I draw a lot on Maver and Dix for some of this stuff. And it's not so easy to see, but what you'll see here is there's like a moat like this. So I see a depressionist circle, and you've got this raised area right here, these rings. And there's 3 of them right here at the Esker site. And Maver and Dix go on at length in their book Manitou about this and the Esker being a very important native ritual site. I haven't investigated this deeply. It's just enough to know that this site is within the Neshoba, not only on paper, but the area itself. So it's very interesting. And I mentioned prayer seats. This is not at the Esker, but I want to give you an example of a good one. They're basically a horseshoe ring of stones. The thought is that you would sit in here facing the direction of the horseshoe, and that they are often aligned to some kind of a solar alignment, a setting sun, a rising sun of some sort. So anyhow, that's an example of what a prayer seat is. Now at the Boxborough Esker, there is Maver and Dix identified this as a prayer seat, but you can see it's in very, very poor condition. And that's why I wanted to give you a picture of one that actually was in good condition. And this is kind of actually facing the side of the Esker, where a stone wall runs up the side and down the other. And it's along that stone wall that I believe there's a sunset alignment. Okay, another thing to bear in mind about the interesting Indian Native American things right here in the area is that the Tophet swamps. Now there's a lot of Tophet swamps in Massachusetts and virtually nowhere else, but virtually nowhere else. And when you put those Tophet swamps on a map, a very curious thing happens. Tophet, 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 and Tophet. That's the Mohawk Trail. Those Tophet swamps just bang right down the Mohawk Trail and kind of spread out, I'm conjecturing, going towards Boston. Certainly Salem was an important Indian location prior to the Tarentine Wars. There was a major Indian fort here, as well as up in Ipswich. So Tophet is a biblical word. You may recognize that. It has to do with, if you look into what happened in Tophet in the Bible, it's a place of sacrifice, of shrieks, and of fire. So looking at, and these Tophets were named in colonial times, and of course, colonials would say, well, you know, that's Bear Swamp because there's bears in it. You know, that's Rattlesnake Hill because there's rattlesnakes there. That's Doublet Swamp because there's shrieking fires and dancing there. So I conjecture, and I have a whole presentation I can give on this, but what the time. So anyhow, just enough to know that there's one right here in Littleton within the bounds of the Neshoba Plantation at Oak Hill. It's called Tophet Chasm and Swamp. And so that's another ritual site where native shaman and powwows would happen. Okay, and here we are within Tophet Swamp and Chasm in Littleton. It's within this deep gorge. Okay. The following statement from Mabor and Dixon, Manitou, sums up well their views and interests in the lands of the Neshoba Indian village. We believe that the shaman preachers of Neshoba used the praying Indian villages to maintain the Indian communication links, the sacred landscape and the stone and earthen structures in the midst of encroaching white colonists. We believe that central to their world was the Boxborough Esker. Like I said, Mabor and Dix make a big deal about that Boxborough Esker. I agree with everything but the Boxborough Esker being of ultimate centrality to the Indian religious activity in the area, although it certainly would be a significant component. The entire Neshoba area has significant religious spiritual locations, such as the Half Moon Meadow Solstice site and the Tophet Swamps. I feel the Indian Newtown area between Magog Pond and Fort Pond on the Acton-Littleton line was the more central to the natural intrinsic uniqueness of Neshoba. We're just going to talk a little bit more about geology, and then we're going to wrap it up. The entire region is an area of sedimentary schist and gneiss that extends 21 miles from Lowell to Bolton on a northeasterly axis. It's about 5.5 miles wide. In geologic terms, this area is called the Neshoba zone, and is composed of sedimentary schist and gneiss. There are several small islands of intrusive rock rising out of this ancient seabed of the Neshoba zone. These islands are composed of Andover and Acton granite, a light gray to pinkish gray stone. Okay, so I got a geological map of Massachusetts, and this yellow here is the schist and gneiss, the Neshoba zone, and sticking up out of it are these islands of Andover and Acton granite. The largest of these 7 islands in the very middle of the Neshoba zone is the rocky hill sandwiched between Magog and Fort Pond. Magog Pond, Fort Pond. This is the Sarod Doublet Forest, the Indian Newtown and heart of the old Neshoba Indian Plantation. This hill is literally an island of granite in a sea of sedimentary schist and gneiss. This granite island is a small, elongated oval running northeasterly about 3 miles long and 3/4 miles wide. Isn't that a strange thing? Just kaboom, that central area is right on this granite island. Significantly, the hills of the Moodus region are domes of schist and gneiss, same as the sea of rock that composes the rest of the Neshoba zone and Neshoba Hill itself. So the Neshoba Hill and Mount Tom are made of the exact same geology, schist and gneiss. And that's a picture of Mount Tom's schist and gneiss. Okay, so let's just focus in on this. Okay, the blue here is the old praying Indian village. Just here's Magog Pond, here's Fort Pond, here's Acton. Here is the 500-acre Indian Newtown, the last area they held onto, and the most significant. Here's the Sarod Doublet Forest area, and you can see the purple is the granite, and you can see how much of that last little section was actually on the granite, virtually a good 2/3 or more of it right there. There is more of the Andover Acton granite within the bounds of the old praying Indian village than in the rest of the entire Neshoba zone. And we've got 10 more slides.
Where is Neshoba Hill on that map?
Okay, Neshoba Hill would be right about here.
Okay.
Here's here's the Great Road here, so we'd be
Oh,
up
that's
here.
where the telephone tower is?
The telephone tower?
Oh, that's where the ski.
Um,
Oh, where the ski area. Neshoba Hill.
Oh, the
ski
Neshoba
area.
Hill ski area,
That's
yes,
what-
it's up here.
Yeah.
It's off the edge of the map.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry about that.
I'm sorry.
It's okay, I was just wondering what the
Right.
proximity.
Yeah, so they're very close. I mean, Magog Pond and the ski hill are about 1.5 miles away from each other. But yeah, I think that's a good point. Yes, sir?
But your point is that the rumblings happened at the ski area, right?
Okay, the Indians said it happened in the lake. The Colonials said it happened from the hill. They had a different opinion where the origin was.
Okay.
But, once again, we're looking at lines on paper. The Indians would not have viewed Neshoba Hill as being, whoa, that's over there in Westford, that has no relevance. They would be, it's just the general area. So even though the hill is over there, I mean, it is within the area.
In that whole area.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you saw that light in the sky, which direction were you looking? Where were you standing and where were you looking? Because
Okay,
I've
this
seen
is,
something similar to that too.
okay, this is Magog Pond.
Yeah.
I was right about here, so I would have been looking due west.
So you're looking in that direction.
Yeah, I was looking right up here at the old
Huh.
Indian place. That's why it's significant. It was like right there over the hill. The hill lit up. I wonder what if the lights have actually been on the hill when that happened.
Were you expecting something, or we just happened to be?
No, it's just, I was like 18, me and a friend went out there just to, nice night to hang out. And it's like, whoa, that was strange. Okay, it would seem that this geology was significant to the unique character of the site and to Hanawan's desire to preserve it as a praying Indian village, though in opposition to his shamanic advisors, it would seem. This is something I want to talk more about. Let me just check the time here. Okay, I think I can do it. That's good. Okay. Tehanawan gave the okay for the praying Indian village, but it took 6 years before it actually happened because he was in contention with his leading men. His leading men were the shaman. He wanted it to be a village. The shaman did not want it to be a village. It was resolved in the end by becoming a village and the shaman moving away about 20 miles south to an island in a river, and the main shaman, his name was Tantamouse. And what I believe happened was that Tehanawan wanted to become a praying Indian village to save the site. And I think the shaman did not want that to happen because they felt that was in some way going to take the magic out of it, for lack of a better word. And things stuck there for about 5 or 6 years. They couldn't come to terms, and finally Tehanawan won out. And we know that at that point the shaman left the site, and it's doubtful that any shamanic activity ever happened Indian shamanic activity ever happened again at that site after it became a praying Indian village. It seems all indications of that disappeared. The shamanic activity took up with Tantamouse further south in an island in the Sudbury River. Okay, the heart of the village was centered on the Granite Island. Thus, the heart of the vision questing in shamanic activity was also centered on the granite as well. Hockomock's voice may have come from the schist hill, but he was invoked from the granite. Okay. The voice of Hockomock was a powerful call to the shaman of old in Neshoba. In fact, according to legend, Sachem Tehanawan didn't simply die, but apparently followed the voice of Hockomock into the hill itself, where he now lives his ghostly life in Hockomock's domain, Neshoba Hill, seen from Route 2A at the Pickard Farm. Okay. In an essay written about 1910, Littleton schoolboy Jonathan Harwood recalled a local legend that Tehanawan and King Philip, Indian Sachems, as the legends run, still hold their ghostly powwows in a cave on Neshoba, hence the roar of dissenting voices occasionally issued. According to this legend, Sachem Tehanawan is therein accompanied by King Philip, otherwise known as Metacom, the most powerful and fearsome Indian of Massachusetts history. King Philip developed such a frightful reputation in King Philip's war against the English settlers that dozens of place names still bear the remembrance of this Wampanoag Sachem. That's King Philip's War Club. Fruitlands Museum has it. It went missing about 20, 30 years ago and showed up at a yard sale. Strange but true. Interesting, my entire family, with the exception of one small boy, was massacred by England, by the Indians in 1675 down in Warwick. Young boy survived, taken hostage, traded back for a pumpkin. It's the price of my life, I guess. Okay, so, King Philip. There is a reason to attach King Philip's name to the area. A King Philip's War incident occurred 350 yards from Neshoba Hill, on a small hill between it and Magog Pond, called Hockomock Hill. What I'm doing here is I'm drawing the connection as to why King Philip would be attached to that hill, because it just seems random otherwise. In February of 1676, Mary Shepherd or Powers was keeping watch on Hockomock Hill while her uncles Isaac and Jacob Shepherd threshed corn in a nearby barn. And I'm using the word Mary Shepherd because if anyone's aware of this story, they're going to know it under the Mary Shepherd name. But more recent research very strongly suggests that we're actually talking about Mary Powers and not Mary Shepherd. The Indians took them all by surprise, abducted Mary, and killed the uncles. Mary escaped to Chelmsford 3 days later, probably stealing a horse, and that's a pretty plucky thing to do for a 13-year-old girl in the dead of winter in the wilderness. This is the Wenamisset Middle Camp in New Braintree, where she was held and escaped from. And here's Hockomock Hill. This is the junction of 2A and Powers Road in Littleton. It was up here somewhere. She was standing watch, got captured, her uncles got killed. We've got 5 more slides, so we're going to do it. Okay, King Philip is the arch-enemy Indian of the Puritan colonials and all things English, personifying to them all that was heathen, wild, and savage in the New World. That he is supposedly in the hill conducting heathen powwows is an indication of the non-Christian practices associated in Puritan minds with the sounds emanating from the hill. Just as significantly, the Sachem Tehadawon, supposedly a convert, is also in the caves beneath the hill, conducting ghostly powwows, veritable rituals to Hockomock, with the most feared Indian in Massachusetts history. The noises from the hill are supposedly the roaring of their rebellious voices. Tehadawon, associated with the place of Hockomock's voice as Sachem of Neshoba, and thereby Neshoba praying Indian village, has in the end become one of the voices of the hill, if not the king under the mountain himself. So here we're right back to having a king under the mountain again. Had one in Moodus, we got one in Neshoba. Compare this with another king under the mountain, king of Markamoodus, and there you go, we're making these connections. It is also interesting how the legends around Neshoba Hill migrated across the two competing cultures. It went from the Indians believing that the winds were pent in the hill to the colonials believing that the Indians themselves were pent in the hill. Let's talk more about the name Neshoba, because there's more to it than just place between the waters, and this really finishes things. Even John Eliot recognized there was something special about Neshoba. The name itself, as understood by Eliot, reflects this. Here's a deeper look at the name. Regarding Eliot's Algonquin Bible, William Wallace Tooker writes in 1901, the root Nash, as in Nashoway, I guess I don't know how to say that, signifies in the middle, midst, between. And Eliot employs the exact same root figuratively, Nash, for spirit, soul, and breath in the Algonquin Bible, as in Nashe-Anet, meaning the Spirit of God, or Nashe-On, I guess, a spirit, and elsewhere he uses it in the Bible for breath. This indicates in other evidence, this is icing on the cake. Well, you know, the Native Americans were not the only people that have found something special to the Sarod Doublet forest. Now here's a Neo-Pagan stone circle in the Sarod Doublet forest that showed up in the mid-80s. It's still there. And, you know, you often find some of the monks, I think the Tibetan monks, I'm not quite sure, from westward, they like to come out here and sit on the rocks and meditate. So it draws spiritual people from different traditions and paths to come here and partake in whatever this spirit is. Like Mavor and Dix, I also think that history and evidence indicate that the Neshoba praying Indian village was a uniquely special place and chosen for religious reasons by the Indians. Hockomock lived like a king in the depths of the rumbling hill, and shamans sought him here in vision quest in the underground chambers, living among Tehadawans folk in the village on the granite island, an island which is deep in the earth. The earthquake signals Hockomock's might and agitated the waters of Neshoba Pond. The glowing lights added to the mystery of the place. The boomings were his voice, and his slightest whisper could be read in the movements of the perched rocking stones. Quartz was found here for carving the waken bird in appeasement if necessary. I didn't get much into the white quartz, but we find it here in Neshoba as well as in Buddhist. It was for carving these special little figures that were supposed to protect or appease Hockomock, but not a lot of time to get into that. Stone turtles climbed from the sacred water to sacred hill. Strange powers lived in the pond and moved its waters, and would drag you into the deeps if you approach too close. Perhaps the Apsinic story was a metaphor or warning to the uninitiated. Here be dragons. Okay, let's sum it up and tie it together. Okay, Makamudas, the place there is a bad noise. Neshoba, in the midst of spirit. Makamudas, known vision quest site. Neshoba, proposed vision quest site. Let's line them up and see what we got. In Mudis, we have localized earthquake epicenter. Neshoba, localized earthquake epicenter. Mudis, regular ongoing seismic activity. Neshoba, regular ongoing seismic activity. Mudis, explosive boom centered on a hill. Neshoba, same thing. The hill with the booms is made of schist and gneiss. Neshoba, that's Mount Tom. In Neshoba we have Neshoba Hill. It's made of schist and gneiss. Mudis, rumblings and hummings in the earth. Neshoba, same thing. Strange light phenomena in Mudis, earthquake lights. Neshoba, we got them too. Rocking stones. Mudis, yes. Neshoba, yes. And this is the place we know is a spirit quest vision site. And we got the same things going on here. It's just word for word. Underground chambers and kivas in Mudis. 8 of them here in Neshoba. Prayer seats in Mudis. Prayer seats in Neshoba. White quartz in Mudis. White quartz in Neshoba. An Indian settlement. Neshoba's got an Indian settlement. Shaman powwows. We read about them historically being in Mudis. Well, there were shaman powwows in Neshoba. The guy's name was Tantamouse. That was one of them. King under the mountain in Mudis. Yep, Neshoba. King under the mountain in Neshoba. And we got some more too. We got the water panther. The Apsinic story is based on actual folklore. A personification of earthquakes. We have the turtle effigies that I showed you. We have the half-moon solstice sunrise site that you can go see anytime you like. We have the Boxborough Esker, which I believe is also a protected land that you can just walk on. And we have the Hockomock Swamp powwowing sites. Based on this comparison between a known vision quest site and the Neshoba site, I feel very confident in saying that in Neshoba we have the very same thing, but on a smaller scale. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight.